Good evening, everyone, and welcome to 3GMY's Book Talk series with tonight's special guest, Dr. Jack Fried. Dr. Fried will be discussing his book, Heirs of Auschwitz, the true story of the Holocaust, transforming intergenerational trauma and the meaning of existence. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Shannon Saks, and I'm a 3GNY board member, but I'm also a grandchild of 2 Holocaust survivors. If you're new to our community, welcome. 3GMY is an educational nonprofit for grandchildren of survivors and our supporters. As a living link, we preserve the legacies and lessons of the Holocaust. Our mission is to educate diverse communities about the perils of intolerance. We've all seen the heartbreaking studies showing the lack of Holocaust education amongst recent college graduates and high school students. The good news is that students who do receive Holocaust education are more tolerant and comfortable with people of different races and of different backgrounds. They're more willing to challenge incorrect or biased information and are more likely to be upstanders. Needless to say, education is the answer. This is why We Educate, our We Do program, is so critical today. We Do is our specialized training program, which teaches grandchildren of survivors to learn and compellingly share their family testimony in school classrooms. 3GMY has trained over 250 speakers, and we've reached over 25,000 young minds. But we need to do more. In light of the COVID pandemic, we've transitioned many of our events and school visits to virtual settings, including tonight's book talk. And we've also created new events, such as our popular We Do Wednesdays, where grandchildren of survivors tell their stories. Through our grandparents' testimony, we talk about the importance of stepping in and early and often where small injustices are found. Hope is not lost, and we need your help in continuing our mission. To that end, you can help us accomplish this through a financial gift of any amount. Anything is greatly appreciated. Your contributions will go directly towards training more speakers, thus reaching more students. So I believe we're going to put in the chat a link so you can donate, a quick way to do it. And thank you for helping us tell our grandparents' stories and for coming to our Zoom events and hopefully soon to live events. So as I mentioned earlier, tonight we have Dr. Jack Fried. He's an author. He's an optometrist, he's a Queens native, and most importantly, he's the grandchild of 4 Holocaust survivors. Dr. Jack Fried, who we lovingly call Jack, recently published his book, as I mentioned, called The Heirs of Auschwitz, a true story of the Holocaust, transforming intergenerational trauma and the meaning of existence. As the era of first-generation Holocaust survivors is sadly approaching its end, their stories as well as their traumas live on through their descendants. Current research suggests that subsequent generations of survivors have also been affected from the result of the experiences and traumas of their parents and grandparents. Dr. Fried's book takes a look into how the events of the Holocaust have forever changed the lives of survivors and their progeny, and discusses the psychological manifestations that have occurred with him 2 generations later. Dr. Fried's book deals with intergenerational trauma and epigenetics, which, if you don't know, is the study of how your behaviors and the environment can cause changes that affect the way your genes work. His book takes you on a personal roots trip to Poland, where he tried to find answers to his questions about himself, where he came from, and he learns more about the origins of his lifelong battle with separation anxiety, which then led him on a spiritual journey, enabling him to transcend his fears and struggles. Now that I've pretty much summarized the book, we can all go home. No, just kidding. So this is the book. You can all pick it up on Amazon or at a bookstore, call your local bookstore. But for now, it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Fried. Take it away.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you. And thank you for having me. Hello, everybody. So I'm going to focus mostly on some of the topics that are in the book, but not too much. I want to, I think, talk more about the meat of it, which I think would interest everybody as well. Like Shannon said, my name is Jack Fried. I'm a Queens native. I live in Long Island, New York. I'm an optometrist. I am born to Israeli immigrants. My father's family immigrated here from Israel to the United States in 1967. My mother's family immigrated here from Israel in 1958. My parents met here. I was born in 1971. And where did this all come from? Well, I'll tell you a little bit about my own personal experience with separation anxiety. Ever since I was a child, ever since I can remember, I've always had an issue separating from my nucleus, separating from my home. Bad. It was a fairly intense level of anxiety. I bounced around as a kid from child psychologist to child psychologist. No one was able to help. No one was able to pinpoint a cause. No one was able to help guide me as to how to cope with this. And it was just going, I was basically just going in circles. As kids usually do, we learned how to cope with this. I learned how to cope with this on my own through whatever coping mechanisms I developed. Life went on. I graduated college. I went to optometry school up in Boston, where I met my wife. We came back down to New York. We settled down. We started a family. I started a practice. Once things in life started to get incredibly stressful, as life happens, I found that the separation anxiety that I experienced as a child came back. I came up with a conclusion that it actually never left. I just kind of buried it back down there. After trying to exhaust different efforts in terms of trying to find a reason as to why, going to different psychologists as an adult to try to talk to, I really didn't give much faith into the area of psychology because of my own personal experiences with it. It did not help me. It helps a lot of people, but for me, it didn't really do much. But I was grasping at straws. I was desperate. I wasn't getting help or relief from anybody or anything. And I ended up speaking to a psychologist rather, once a week, just trying to figure out what's going on here. Went in on my first session, introduced myself. Why are you here? Well, I'm experiencing separation anxiety. Describe it. I would describe it. Have you experienced it before? Yes, as a child. We went on and on as my therapist went more and more into my history, the history of my parents, the history of my grandparents. After, I would say, my second or third session, it hit me with a ton of bricks. She basically said to me, you know, your childhood, Jack, was anything but normal. To me, it was completely normal. I'm growing up in America. I had my kids, my friends, schoolmates, you know, everything seemed fine. She basically said to me, your childhood was anything but normal. You need to understand you are a third generation born to Holocaust survivors from both sides of your family, where separation meant death. I listened to her. I listened to what she had to say. And I basically, you know, my response was, well, my grandparents really didn't talk about their experiences to their grandchildren. They would speak to their friends. They would speak to my parents, to their other siblings, to my aunts and uncles, never to me, never to my siblings, never to my cousins. I had no idea what their experience was or what their story was. She actually introduced me to the field of epigenetics. She said there's a lot of research being done on intergenerational trauma in the field of epigenetics, which I never heard of, quite frankly, before that session. This is, you know, back in the early 2000, you know, early 2000, whenever it was. I don't even remember. It was so long. But anyway, I said, okay, well, this is interesting. Let me look more into this. Let me do some homework. Okay. So I went to go learn about what epigenetics was. And for those that don't know, epigenetics is a specialized branch of genetic science which studies various phenotypic traits, phenotypic meaning traits that are expressed. We have traits that are genotypic and are not expressed. We inherited traits that are phenotypic and expressed. So epigenetics, again, is a specialized branch of genetic science which studies various expressed phenotypic trait variations, which can change as a result of our environment. There has been a substantial amount of research that has been done, that is presently being done. Some of the people that I speak about this would dismiss it. They would poo-poo it. There's no such thing. It's in your head. Well, to me, it was more than just in my head. To me, it was part of my life. It was just as much a part of me as my fingers or any part of my body. So the study of epigenetics actually, the inheritable traits that we carry they're caused by trauma in the environment, can actually activate or deactivate through methylation our genes. They don't change the gene sequence, but it changes our genes. And epigenetics can also explain why latent transmission can actually manifest under stress, which is what ended up happening with me. Okay, so I mean, growing up, third grade is where it was really bad in terms of separation anxiety. I refused to leave the house. I refused to go to school. I refused to socialize. I would not go to camp. I would not go to overnights. Anything separating me from my nucleus, in my mind, was death. It took the therapist to actually bring that out and to actually explain that. One of my mother's favorite stories when I was a child in nursery school, one of the teachers would actually go up to her and say, Hannah, does Jack get enough sleep when he's home? Yeah, he's 4 or 5 years old. Of course he gets enough sleep. He sleeps throughout the night. Why do you ask? Well, I'm asking because when he comes to nursery school, once you drop him off, he basically puts his head down, goes to sleep, and doesn't wake up until it's time to go. My mother tells me this story. She tells everyone this story. I don't remember this ever happening, but it makes perfect sense. As a young child, that's how I was able to cope. Going to sleep makes time go by. I either had the choice to sit there and suffer, waiting for the day to go by, waiting for my mother to come pick me up, or I can put my head down, go to sleep, and time will just fly by. So at a very, very early age, I realized that I had already started coping with what was going on. Fast forward a little bit, in 2006, 2007, my mother and my uncle received an invitation from the president of Poland to attend a ceremony honoring righteous Poles that had saved Jewish lives during the Shoah, during the Holocaust. My mother was unable to go, so I volunteered to go in her stead. She asked me if I would go, so I said, yeah, absolutely, I would love to go. My uncle Akiva, who was the family historian, pretty much, my mother's older brother. My mother's the middle child. It's her older brother Akiva. She has a younger sister Yona. We ended up going to Poland. And my purpose of going to Poland was strictly to dig for roots. I wanted to see where this anxiety was coming from, if it was born here in Poland. In my thinking, logically, this was the result of something. So if this is the effect of something, my separation anxiety, there's got to be a cause. If I was able to narrow down the cause and understand it and approach it like an adult, as an adult, logically, I figured I would be able to change the effect. You change the root, you'll change the effect. Change the cause, you change the effect. I knew what the effect was. My entire life, I knew what the effect was, but I didn't know what the cause was. I couldn't nail down the cause. So we actually, we started our trip. Let me share my screen here. Have I been muted the whole time? No, I was able to, okay, because it just said I was, okay. Whew. All right, so we started our trip. We were there for only 4 days. We started out in Ozarow. We met a guide. My uncle was generous enough to actually cover the entire trip and to hire a guide. We were able to get a guide from an organization called JRI Poland, Jewish Record Indexing Poland. We gave him the information of the shtetl my grandparents were from, the camps, their numbers, everything. He did a good amount of research for us before we even got there. So we started out over here in Ozarow. The cemetery, this is the Jewish cemetery in Ozarow. What you can't appreciate right now are the sizes and the details of what's written on the matzavot, on the headstones over here. The cemetery was divided by a road. On one side was the Jewish cemetery. On the other side was the Catholic cemetery, the Christian cemetery. The Christian cemetery, by the way, is still being used, and it was pristine. The landscaping, the stones, everything. Really, it was pristine. The Jewish cemetery, on the other hand, was filthy. It was littered. You could tell that the locals there went, partied, kids, whatever. Here's another picture of the matzavot. Soon I'm going to show you a picture of my uncle standing in front of one of them. My uncle stands at around 6 feet. That's my uncle Akiva, just to give you an idea as to the size of the stones. So when we were there, we basically were trying to locate family members that had lived in Ozarow. Unable, we were completely unsuccessful with doing that. Another view of the cemetery. This is just basically our guide to Poland. Another matzeva. Okay, Ulicka Żydowska. Basically, in Polish, that means Jew Street, Jewish Street. When we went to the town that my grandparents are from, the town is called Sandomierz, and inside the town of Sandomierz is a smaller little town called Klimentov. I went a little too far here. Called Klimentov. They're from the town of Klimentov. We stayed at the only hotel in the village there in Sandomierz, which was called on Jew Street. That's where all the Jews were basically gathered before being shipped to Treblinka in cattle cars as human cargo. The population, the Jewish population of Klimentov prior to World War I, was about 4,000 Jews to every Pole, 4-to-1 ratio. Today, there's 0 Jews. The entire town of Klimentov is Judenrein. It's cleansed from Jews. We spent the night doing a little bit of genealogical research. We woke up the next day. We took a walk around the town. We visited the area where my grandmother worked for her sister and her sister's husband as a bookkeeper. And it was a very, very quaint, beautiful town, cobblestone streets. We decided to take a walk to the synagogue. Typically, in these old towns, in these old cities, in these old villages, in these shtetls, the synagogue was located very, very close to the cemetery, to the Jewish cemetery. When Jews throughout the ages would travel from country, getting expelled from one country, making another host country their home for however long until they were expelled back and forth. We all know the history. With the first order of business when Jews would settle a town would be to buy a plot of land, build a shul, establish a Chevra Kadisha, a holy society, a burial society, and establish a cemetery. So we walked over to the synagogue. Before we even entered the synagogue, we walked to the back of the synagogue. I went to go look for the cemetery. There was none there. It was basically a paved parking lot. There's nothing there, with the exception of what you see in front of you, the swastika. This was actually stenciled to several areas on the back of the former shul, which serves now as the city's current archives. If you look closely on top in Polish, what that says is finish them in Polish. You see over here, there's a gun pointing to the head of the swastika. This was actually stenciled, like I said, in several areas of the back of the synagogue. If you ask me if these are still there today, I have no doubt that they are still there. We made our way into the archives. We showed the officials there the invitations that we received from the president of Poland as to why we were there. We explained through Chris, our interpreter, through JRI, that we're actually Jewish descendants from people that had lived here for hundreds and hundreds of years, and we wanted to search the archives. They granted us access with the exception, they said you can film anything you want with the exception of anything having to do with modern day Polish archives, which basically left the murals on the inside of the shul, which I'll get to in just a minute. So we went in. Yeah, there we go. Finish them. At the front of the synagogue, it says the former synagogue built at the end of the 17th century. At present, it houses the city's archives. In the past, since 1364, the Jewish community in Sandomierz had the privilege of the king's protection. 1364 just sounds like a number, but that's close to 650 years ago. The Jews had settled Klimentov, Poland over close to 650 years ago. We're talking about 130 years before Christopher Columbus discovered the New World, just to put things into perspective. That's, in terms of history. This is one of the faded murals inside of the synagogue. This is another faded mural inside of the synagogue. The synagogue, on the ceilings of the synagogue, they were painted the zodiacs. The zodiacs are called mazal. Mazal meaning stars. People say, mazal tov, congratulations, good luck. It's really not what it means. Mazal tov actually means, may the stars be with you. Here's another, you can see it says mazal underneath there. Mazal. Another, trying to get, this is actually another mural taken in front of the Aron Kodesh. And let me tell you something, these Poles know what they're talking about. They know Aron Kodesh, they knew they knew a lot more than what I would originally give them credit for. We left the shul, we went to my grandparents' home of Klimentov. That was the synagogue. This is the synagogue of what it looks like today. The synagogue was built in 1851. Till this day, this synagogue is the most beautiful building, no joke, in that town. Back in the day, when my grandparents were living there prior to the war, this synagogue actually rivaled the one in Krakow. And the synagogue in Krakow, people would come from all over to see the synagogue or to come and worship at the synagogue. We were able to actually access the inside of the synagogue due to the help of Chris and JRI Poland. So if this entrance, the archway was where the men would enter. The men would worship on the bottom. The stairs would lead you to this window, and the window would lead you to the upstairs, and the upstairs is where the women would worship. And it's important to understand why there's a separation between men and women when it came to worshiping. It's not like going to a conservative shul or a reform shul the way it is today. The way I was brought up with in a conservative family, non-religious. We didn't keep kosher. We didn't keep Shabbat. We didn't keep anything. prior to the war, my grandparents, had beards down to here. They were very, very religious. My lost it completely after the war. My grandfather stopped believing in God. So this is the which I don't believe, by the way. He was angry with God. I don't think he ever stopped believing in God. So this is the shul. So getting back to why the separation between men and women when it comes to praying was to be able to put your mind. You have to be into the right mindset when you go when you go and you pray in front of your Creator. And it's just natural to look around and to spy on the opposite sex and to lose your focus. That's the whole purpose. It has nothing to do with sexism. That's the whole purpose of having a division between men and women in Orthodox shuls. So you can focus on your prayers, focus on connecting with your Creator. This was what's left of the Aron Kodesh inside the shul. You can see there are a couple of yurtzeit candles. There's a flower placed there. We don't know who did that. There are some concerts that were held in this shul. There were some events, for the community that was held in this shul. In the back of this shul was a cemetery. The cemetery, the stones of the cemetery, the matzavot, are no longer there. They were removed, but the bodies were still interred. And we'll get into anti-Semitism in a minute. But what blew my mind when I was in the back with my uncle and we're walking around, they basically converted the entire back of the shul into they built an elementary school, they built an athletic complex, they built a playground, all on top of the cemetery. There's nothing there to commemorate what was once there, what's currently there. Very disturbing. We started walking toward the back of the shul on the cemetery, which was a playground. My uncle had visited that exact spot actually back in 1991 with my mother. There was a little corner with a couple of broken headstones. That's gone now. That's not even there anymore. So my uncle was telling me, he goes, things are so shallow here that it really doesn't take much to just scour, look around the field and find bones, human bones that come up during the rain, that come up during the washes. And that's actually exactly what we found. This is a picture of my uncle and my mother back in 1991. You could see the broken matzavot. They're looking. This area is not there anymore either. Next picture is just a picture of the matzavot inside that area. These are some of the bones that I had found when I was there. We asked the kids were all surrounding us. I had my video camera out. Everyone was coming around us. What's going on? I think we were probably the only Jews, or the first Jews that they had ever met. And my uncle asked them, do you know what this is? Do you see what this is? Do you see what we're holding? And the kids would come around, oh, yeah, tak, which means yes in Polish. And Chris was there to help us translate. Yeah, they're Jew bones. Excuse me? Yeah, those are Jew bones. We see them all the time. Oh, really? What do you do with them when you see them? Well, there's a bucket up in the elementary school. There's a bucket in the history department, in the history where we learn history, local history. We throw them in the bucket in the history. Oh, fantastic! That's great. Could you take us to the room to see? My intention was to take the bucket with me, to be honest. It didn't belong there. It hit me to such a point where I collected whatever bones I found, put them into my pocket. I ended up calling my rabbi, a Chabad rabbi, an Orthodox rabbi, back in New York, telling him what was going on, what we had found, what was the right thing to do. This doesn't sit well with me. This is killing me inside. What's the right thing to do? What is it? What does the Torah say to do in this? What's the halacha? What do we do? And he told me, basically, to my chagrin, that he said, Jack, you should not have touched the bones. You should have left them there. You should not have disturbed them. What? I really? I said, I'm sorry, Rod. That doesn't sit well with me. I already disturbed them. They're already with me. I need another answer. What's the other answer? He goes, well, I'll give you the name of someone who specializes in this area. You can give him a call, see what he says. Gave him a call, got the same answer. You should not have disturbed these bones. Okay, I disturbed them. What do I need to do? Well, you need to bury them. So my intention was to bring these bones back with me to New York, have them buried at my own expense at the Klimatov plot where my grandparents are buried. That ended up not happening, and I'll get into that story as well. We left Klimatov. We're on our way to Krakow, where we spent the night at the Holiday Inn. We're going to start the next day at Auschwitz. As we checked into the hotel in Krakow, I had the bones are sitting in my pocket. We check in. I was exhausted mentally, emotionally, physically. We all were. It took us about 3 hours to drive from Sandomierz to Krakow. The reason why it took so long to drive, I believe it was Krakow. Was it Krakow? I believe it was because the roads are in such disrepair. It should have taken a lot shorter, but it didn't. Long story short, there was a yeshiva that checked into that hotel just as we were checking into the hotel. They had checked in right as, thank goodness we got to the front desk before they did, because all I wanted to do was take a shower and go to sleep. We got our room keys. We went upstairs. Everything was great. Took a shower, started wrapping up the bones in my little makeshift container, respectfully, where I wanted to keep them until my return trip back to New York. My uncle went down to smoke a cigar outside, where he ran into one of the rabbis of the yeshiva that had checked in. And he basically told the rabbi story about the bones and about what was going on. And, he told him in Hebrew. My uncle speaks fluent Hebrew and Yiddish. I speak enough Hebrew to understand. I can understand it pretty well. I was ready to go to sleep after a crazy day. My uncle comes into the room. Akiva comes into the room. He goes, Jack, I've got an answer to your bone dilemma. Got an answer to my bone dilemma. What's the answer? He goes, well, I was downstairs and I struck up a conversation with one of the rabbis, and he's actually in the room right next door to us. He's going to come in, and on his way up, he's going to stop in and introduce himself to you. Wow, great. Okay. Knocks on the door, introduces himself. I told him what the story, I related to him in Hebrew. He asked to see the bones. I showed them to him. He said, wow. He said, what do you shouldn't have disturbed them. That was my third. You shouldn't have disturbed them. You should have left them where they are. And my response to him was, that does not sit well with me. But now that I took it upon myself to do the right thing, I want to see that they're buried the right way. He said, if you want, I'll take them off your hand and I'll bury them. I'll have them buried in Israel. So I said that let me think about that. He goes, okay, I'm not putting pressure on you. You can think about it. If you want, I'm giving a course downstairs to some of my students. If you want to decide today, you can come down. I'll be there for another 2 hours. Otherwise, come to see me tomorrow morning if you decide. Thank you. Couldn't go to sleep. Started pacing. What's the right thing to do? I don't know. Finally decided, let me go downstairs. Let me give it to him and let him bury these bones in Israel, where they should be, not here. And he did. I walked into the room. I sat down. He was teaching in one of the ballrooms downstairs, a little corner with maybe 100 or so of his students. And I sat down. I kind of snuck in and sat down. And as I did that, he made eye contact with me, and he was giving a lecture in Hebrew. I said, what? I didn't grow up religious. So I said, let me sit down. Let me see if I can pick up a little information of what he's teaching. So I sat down, and as I sat down, he basically stared at me, and cold silence, complete silence. And then he says in Hebrew, he relates to his students in Hebrew, he goes, now I'm going to tell you guys a story that is going to shake you to your core. And he relayed our story in detail to his students. And he looked at me and he said, in Hebrew, are you here because of the reason that I think you're here? I said, yes. He goes, do you have them? Do you have the bones with you? I said, yes. And I approached him and opened up my little makeshift container, and I gave it to him, and they all surrounded us, and there were a lot of oohs and ahs and what was going on. I gave him a little tzedakah. I said, thank you very much for what you're doing. It was, this is incredible. It was something else. Let's see, next slide. Okay, next slide. As we when we were leaving Klimentov, this is actually the house of one of my uncles, Uncle Perry, who had passed away. This is the house he was born in. This is the house that he lived in his entire life until the camps. Next photo is a very famous photo. Why is this a famous photo? Well, it's a very large photo that they have in Yad Vashem, but also it pictures my Perry. This is Perry, and on the bottom bunk over here, that's Elie Wiesel. And Perry and Elie Wiesel were bunkmates. They knew each other up to the day where they had kept in contact with this. Before leaving Sandomierz, when we were going to, I wanted to see the new cemetery. There was a new Jewish cemetery. I had mentioned before about the archives, about the shul. Well, all of the headstones that were left at that shul or left at that cemetery, bodies were still interred there too, by the way, were brought to this cemetery. This cemetery is in the middle of town. It shares the same grounds as a church, as the cloister. Attached to the church is a parochial school. From what I understand, at the time, the church receives a stipend from the state of Poland to maintain the grounds of the new Jewish cemetery on Suha Street. This is actually, as we pulled up to the cemetery, this is the first thing that I saw, which sickened me to my stomach. You could see that the borders of the cemetery were made by broken matzavot. In the middle of the cemetery was a huge, what they call a lapidarium, made up of all the headstones, which I'll show you in memorial. That was actually built also in memorial to the approximate 1,000 Jews in Sandomierz and Klimentov that were murdered, burned, and then buried in this area. Here's some more matzavot in the same cemetery. This is the lapidarium, made up by all the matzavot, all the headstones. As I was making my way through the cemetery back here, Akiva actually spotted on one of these matzavot family. It belonged to family by the name of Factor. And I have a picture of that somewhere, but I'll show it. After, and again, this is all in more detail in my book. After that, we went to go visit Auschwitz. Now, this is the famous Arbeit macht frei, work will set you free, the gate at Auschwitz. As you pass through this gate on the left-hand side, this is where the archives are located in Auschwitz. My uncle is 100% right when he said to me, don't ever get into a debate with a Holocaust denier. All they need to do is take a trip to Auschwitz. They don't need to see they don't need to go any further than the archives. They don't need to see the gas chambers. They don't need to see the crematorium. They don't need to see the ashes. They don't need to see any of that. They just need to go. That's how meticulous the Nazis were in keeping records for their 1,000-year Reich. They wanted to show the world, this is what the Jew was. This is how the Jew dressed. This is how the Jew worshipped. This is how we exterminated the Jews. This is how we got rid of the Jews. If a Holocaust denier is going to continue their denying after seeing what's in the archives, then their denial is born of hate, not ignorance. This is the only gas chamber in Auschwitz, and it's the only gas chamber that's still standing. Adjacent to this gas chamber is a crematorium. Here's the crematorium. Here's a closer shot of the crematorium. Here's, none of these pictures are going to surprise anybody that's listening to this, I'm sure. I'm not going to speak about the horrors that everybody is very familiar with. I want to focus more on its effect on our generation, on second generation, 2Gs, 3Gs. Block 11, the death block. This was my grandfather's block. My grandfather was a political prisoner. So we went into block 11. There were several times where my grandfather would exchange places as per the Nazis with going to the death wall. This is the death wall, the famous death wall. Block 11 over here to the right. Over here to the left-hand side, this is the women's block where gynecological experiments were held. I'm not going to go into any of the gruesome details on that. It's in my book if you're interested. This wall over here, what you're seeing in front of you, the gray, that's new. That's not original. The brick behind it is original. Okay, this is where the gallows were. This is where they would, a shot to the back of the head for political prisoners after a mock trial in block 11. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because it's, I don't want to. Birkenau. This is the tracks leading into Birkenau. A little bit of a closer picture of the watchtower in Birkenau. While the guide that took us to Auschwitz, and by the way, if you're visiting Auschwitz, you need to hire a guide. They will not let you walk the grounds alone. You have to hire and pay for a guide, which they provide you there. When we were there, I heard my uncle getting into a verbal altercation with a woman sitting behind the counter asking for tickets. Where are your tickets? My uncle, tickets? We don't have tickets. Well, I can't let you into the museum, Auschwitz Museum. Can't let you into the museum without tickets. You have to buy tickets. So my uncle, I love him, God bless him, looks to the woman dead in the eye. Tickets? He goes, you expect me to pay? I'm not paying. My parents already paid. My grandparents already paid. My entire family paid. There is no way you're getting me to pay to come in. And it started going back and forth until the guide that Chris actually located for us came and said that, I'll take them. It's fine. We ended up going without having to pay an admission. If you happen to be a survivor of Auschwitz, they will allow you to go on the grounds in a golf cart. Other than that, it's walking only, strictly walking only. Next slide. This is a picture of the selection platform over here on the right, taken from the top of the watchtower. At the end of the towers, at the end of the tracks rather, were the gas chambers and the crematorium. Again, I'm not going to get into details about the atrocities that occurred. But when I kind of sat there and I was taking pictures and I was looking at the selection area here, my heart started to race and I started to sweat and the anxiety started to come out. It was a little bit different. I said, where's this coming from? What's going on? And then the connection was made. This is where separation happens. If you were separated here, that meant death. Separation meant death. From the studies I had read up about epigenetics, our cells on a genetic level, they retain memories. They know what's going on. It's the way, I guess, evolution prepares us to deal with traumatic experiences of our parents and grandparents. So this is what's left of some of the bunks. This was a plate that I found, and let me tell you, the ground in Birkenau is littered. It's a cemetery, and it's littered with artifacts, plates, pottery, human remains. It's a cemetery. These were the latrines. The rest of the latrines were pretty much boarded up. If you happens to be lucky enough to have a work detail in the latrine, this was the best place to be. Why? Because the Nazis were so afraid of getting sick, of communicable diseases, that they stayed away. They stayed away from the latrines. Also, people that had just come to the camps, they would swallow jewelry, they would swallow valuables to keep them away from the Nazis, and they would be found in the latrine with the rest of the waste. And then those valuables could be bartered. They could be bartered for cigarettes. It could be bartered for food. They could be bartered for anything. On their arrival in Auschwitz, most were sent to by the SS for immediate death in the gas chambers. However, they were often to wait their turn in their clump of trees. So when you took a look at this picture and you say, okay, very easy to dismiss this as something that had happened a long time ago. It's a grainy picture. It's black and white. You can see children in here. They have no idea what's waiting for them. I took the same exact picture. These are the trees. It's a big, it adds a little bit of life to it. It makes a difference when you're looking at a black and white picture and you're looking at the same picture in color. There's a difference. It hits home. It hits home. To the memory of the men, women, and children who fell victim to the Nazi genocide, in this pond lay their ashes. May their souls rest in peace. Here's the pond. Okay. A couple more pictures. Fences. This was used to transport bodies from the gas chambers into the crematorium. This is what's left of the gas chambers in Auschwitz. This is a picture of the railroad tracks in Birkenau leading out. You could see how the tracks are littered with yurtzeit candles. You could see a bit of the selection platform here on the left. Again, it's because we're facing out. This is some of the archives that we had, some of the paperwork that we had photocopied from the archives. This is my grandmother's. This is when she arrived in Auschwitz. The date she arrived, where she's from, Stasha. No, I'm sorry, my grandfather, Stasha. This is the number that was tattooed onto his arm, his name, his birth date. Arrival, August 18, 1944. Had no idea. So we tried to pull whatever information we had from the archives. Our guide was able to do that for us. Here's a very neat handwritten list of human cargo brought into Auschwitz. If you look in the middle here, Mitzmacher Wolf, 15914, 153988, number tattooed onto his arm. This is how meticulous the Nazis kept records. Here's one for my grandmother. You could see, let me see, where is she over here? Mitzmacher, she's number 84, Mitzmacher. You'll see the name above her, the two names above her, we'll get to in a minute. She had formed, I had mentioned earlier, we were there to honor the man who had saved my grandmother during the camps when she was there. I'm going to get into his story in a minute. We still keep in touch with this man. His name is Professor Wladyslaw Misiuna. There's a tree planted in Yad Vashem in his honor in the Avenue of the Righteous. But anyway, remember those names, because we're gonna get back to them. Devorah, Sarah, Rachela, which was my grandmother. This is just some information that my uncle Kiva had put together with regards to, we used the genealogy website, ancestry.com, just to kind of put together whatever pieces of information we can find to try to compile a list of a family tree. And we've actually gotten in touch with members of our family that we had no idea existed. This is a copy of the invitation for Kiva Mitzmacher from the President of Poland to come and honor. That's what we actually use this invitation kind of like a pass to try to get access to certain things because it's from the President of Poland. So I think that it had helped us in Sandomierz when we were looking at the archives, and I think that it had helped us throughout our entire journey, to be honest. This is Professor Wladyslaw Misiuna. This is a current picture of him. He wasn't the only Pole honored, but obviously we were there for him. I'll give you a quick synopsis as to what the story is with him. In June 1943, a group of Jews were sent from Sandomierz ghetto to Radom. In this group was my grandmother, Rachel Mitzmacher, Sarah Marmurek, Dvorah Salzberg, and Esther. These 4 women born, and you could see their numbers previous, the numbers are sequential. The numbers tattooed on their arms are 1 number apart, they're sequential. These 4 women formed a bond for life. The numbers tattooed on their arms are sequential. From the ghetto in Sandomierz, they were taken to the Sklina slave labor camp to work in an armaments factory owned by an Austrian who raised rabbits as a hobby. The Germans built a slave labor camp for Jews that was connected to the armament factory. This is where the Jews from the slave labor camp worked. Thousands of these Jews were taken from the Lodz ghetto, where they could not work. When they could not work, they were killed and burned. One day, a young local Polish man named Wladyslaw Misiuna, 17 years old at the time, received word from the administrative director of the factory. He wanted to create a rabbit farm to breed rabbits of a special breed so that fur and meat could be provided for the Germans fighting on the Russian front. The rabbit farm was a big workshop that stood far from the main factory, so the Nazis did not visit there often. Misiuna had got the job of running, supervising, and being responsible for the rabbit farm. He immediately started to think of ways to save Jews. He was appalled by the way Jews were treated by the Nazis. This, coupled with his own childhood experiences of Nazis executing the Jews who took him and his family into their home to live during difficult times, only fueled his fervor. In an effort to get some of these Jewish slave laborers out of the harsh conditions they were in, he asked some of the German soldiers to give him a few of the Jewish women to help him with the rabbits. My grandmother, Rachel, and her friends, Sarah and Dvorah and Esther, were all assigned to Misiuna. He showed the girls how to feed, clean the rabbits, provided them with clean clothes, fresh food. The work there was nothing like the work in the factory. Here, the work was light. The girls had food. Misiuna had brought in pies that were baked by his mother for the girls, risked his life in doing so. He wrote and recited poetry to them so that they would not lose the will to live. One day, my grandmother contracted a skin infection. It happened to be, from what I understand, a very contagious skin infection, which was basically, back then, it was a death sentence. When the Nazis, if the Nazis were to discover it on one of their routine inspections, it would have been a death sentence, shot to the head. That would have been it. Misiuna tried getting my grandmother medicine, which didn't really do much for her. It didn't help her. So what he ended up doing was taking a knife, cutting the skin on his arm, and exposing his open wound to one of her pustules, one of her infectious lesions, intentionally basically infecting himself with her illness. Once he started showing signs of her illness, he sought care for himself outside the camp. He got himself medicine, smuggled the medicine into the camp, again under a penalty of torture and death, and he shared it with my grandmother. This cured both of them. For this act, he was recognized as righteous among the nations by Yad Vashem. Misiuna was given actually a camera by the Polish underground to take pictures and give the camera back, go back and forth to help him. Again, if that would have been found, it would have been an instant death sentence. So on June 25th, 1944, when the Soviet offensive started, the Germans began to liquidate everything at a much faster pace. One day, Misiuna was out in the field collecting grass to feed the rabbits when the Nazis came, liquidated the Skolna camp, including the rabbit farm where my grandmother and her three companions had labored. Upon his return, he found out that they were all taken together by train to Auschwitz-Birkenau. He was devastated. By this time, practically all Jews taken to Auschwitz were sent directly to the gas chambers. My grandmother, the rest of the girls arrived in Auschwitz in August of 1944. Since my grandmother and her companions were taken so well taken care of by Misiuna, they were in fairly decent shape by the time they had arrived in Auschwitz. At the platform, Dr. Mengele came face to face with my grandmother and the others in the group. They all survived selection and they were all sent to labor. In total, my grandmother miraculously survived 3 different health inspections, all performed personally by Dr. Mengele. On November 12, 1944, they were all transferred to the Ober-Altstadt slave labor camp. Soon after, Misiuna was arrested by the Nazis, sent to the same infested wooden barracks that the Jewish slave laborers were sent to. He was tortured, he was beaten, and he was scheduled to be executed. Somehow he managed to escape. He remained in hiding in Radom until he was liberated, which happened in January 16, 1945. Rachel, Sarah, Devorah, and Esther all survived and were liberated by the Soviet Army in May 1945. The rest of the Jews that were taken from that same slave labor camp, they were taken by the Nazis to the Jewish cemetery in Radom, told to dig graves, and they were shot and killed right there on the spot. In June 28, 1966, the state of Israel recognized Professor Wladyslaw Misiuna as righteous among the nations for hiding and saving the lives of Rochela, Mitzmacher, Sophia, Tupika Marmarek, Devorah Salzberg, and Esther. Myself, my siblings, my cousins, all of my cousins all grew up knowing the name Misiuna. It wasn't until the communism fell, the Berlin Wall came down, the Eastern Bloc countries, that we actually got back in touch with him. And that's actually an interesting story on how that happened. Till this day, we're still in touch. I'm still in touch with Misiuna. I'm still in touch with his son. His wife recently passed away, unfortunately. It's just a little something about what I had just read. Here you could see pictured on the very left. On the very left is my uncle Akiva, Darius. That's Misiuna's son, Professor Misiuna. Myself. That was at the ceremony. Here is a close-up of him at the ceremony. This, I believe, is also from that. Yep. This is from the state of Israel, making Professor Wladyslaw Misiuna an honorary citizen. This is a copy, a picture of the plaque. I should go back, but that was a copy of the plaque taken in Yad Vashem. This is a picture of my grandmother on the left and the rest of the girls in the slave labor camp that was run by Misiuna, taken with the camera that was given to him by the underground. This picture was given to my mother from Misiuna at their very first meeting in Poland. I think it was back in 1994. So this was given to him, given to my mother from him. This is my grandmother's pictured here. This is when she was liberated from Auschwitz, taken to Mauthausen. This is a photograph of my grandfather, Wolf Mitzmacher. This is his Auschwitz photo. He's wearing his prison uniform. You could see his Auschwitz number. It says Auschwitz on his shirt. Okay, backtrack a little bit now. I'm back in Poland. I'm in Klimatov. We ended up meeting a man who took it upon himself to be the curator of Jewish relics. He basically has his mother's home is filled with Jewish relics from this town. Why is it so filled with Jewish relics? How did he come? I asked him, how did you come across so many things? He said, well, medicine, like everything else, is corrupt here in Poland. And when the elderly population of that era became sick or needed a procedure done in the hospital or with a doctor, very poor, they didn't have money to pay, they would come, they would give me whatever relics they would have from the Jews that was looted after after Klimatov became Judenrein, and they would barter, they would exchange for money. So this is how he was able to accumulate a lot of this stuff. So I'm looking around his little makeshift museum, and this is so apropos for this time because I came across this. Oh, let me go back. I'm sorry. This was the Yad Vashem. I wanted to go back. I didn't spend too much time on that because he says Poland in Hebrew. So this is actually I was in his shop. I don't know why, but something attracted me, drew me to one of the upper shelves, and he said, I'm looking, and I said, I see some stuff over here with Hebrew lettering. What is that? Bring it down to me. Let me see. Takes down a stack of books and he shows it to me. And this is the condition that these books were in. Fragile. They had to be handled with kid gloves because they would literally disintegrate. You turn the page, they would fall apart. This is a Haggadah, Passover, Ozarow. And this is a couple of other things that we had found. This is actually an approbation from Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the Baal HaTanya, the founder of the Hasidic movement. There's a couple more pictures. Treblinka. I'm not gonna go through everything right now because these are all pictures that everybody has known. What I'd like to do, I think I went a little bit too much. I spoke a little bit too much, but what I would like to do, the whole focus on this is to try to tell everybody out there, second generation, third generation, anybody suffering from trauma, genetic trauma, the inheritance of trauma, PTSD, you can overcome it. You can control your thoughts. There are ways to do this. There are different meditation exercises. I actually went through, Shannon had said that I went through a little bit of a spiritual awakening, so to speak. My path that I had found to work for me, and I had tried all the paths, was Chassidut. What is Chassidut? What is Hasidism? Chassidut. Chassidut, in a nutshell, is Torah thinking. It's classic Kabbalah refined into the psychological terms of human experience. There's a one meditation I'll teach you. I'll tell you really quick that actually helped me through this. This meditation is actually called Hashkata. Hashkata means to silence. It's something that was taught by the rabbi of Piznetsia. He was the very special rabbi. He was murdered in the Holocaust. He wrote a book called B'nai Machshava Tova, which basically he wrote it in the camps, if you could fathom that. And he basically says that 99% of our thoughts are not our thoughts. The thoughts these are thoughts that come from a foreign place. It's called machshava zara. It's a foreign thought. With this type of meditation, you can do it anywhere. You could be standing, you could be sitting, taking a shower, brush your teeth. It doesn't matter. It's a very easy meditation to do. What you do is you basically observe your thoughts as though you're looking at them like on a movie screen. You don't think about them. Look at them. Look at them as though you're watching a movie. And soon you do this enough, you're going to start to realize that these thoughts, they're not your thoughts. You don't have to do anything but just observe them. They're not yours. You do this enough times with this type of healthy meditation, you'll start to learn how to partition your thoughts. You can separate them. These are healthy thoughts. These are not healthy thoughts. These are my thoughts. These are not my thoughts. I don't know where these thoughts are even coming from. As you continue to do that, you can actually, Rabbi Alon Anava from the Bir Miriam Yeshiva in Sfat says you can actually pop these thoughts like they're bubbles. What's the point of all of this? The point of all of this is to try to tell you that not all of the effects of trauma are negative. You can either get stuck in the mindset of victimization, or you can be part of the solution. We, as second generation and third generation, we have a heightened radar. We have a heightened level of awareness for genocide. We have a heightened level of awareness for a lot of things that are unjust that are going on today. We can use these enhanced skills, reinforce resilience to affect a positive change in this world, starting with our environment. If you look at intergenerational trauma, if the negative experiences of our ancestors in the past have this type of effect on us, think about how the opposite could happen if they had a positive effect on them, how that can affect us positively, how we can positively transform our environment and the world around us. The world is hurting. Look around. Without getting into politics, look what's happening in this country. Genocide is still happening. Everything is still happening. I think that it's up to us to make a change, and we need to start with ourselves, and it's doable, and it's fathomable, and with enough effort, it could be done. A lot of people, I'm sure, worry. A lot of people also have regrets. If you regret the past, that's a form of meditation. If you worry about the future that you can't control, that's also a form of meditation. You continue to worry and you continue to regret the past, you're going to get very good at these forms of meditation exercises. So it's about getting yourself out of that funk and getting yourself into a more enlightened way to use this trauma in a positive way. I know we're running short on time. I want to leave time for questions. I wanted to focus a little bit more about different meditations and about the brains and how different thought patterns, how your thoughts can change. Our sages say our thoughts are like a flowing river. You cannot stop your thoughts from happening. There are always going to be thoughts in your mind. What we do have the power to do is we can choose our thoughts. So if we develop an awareness of a thought that's negative, I'm not going there. I'm not thinking that. You change your thought into something positive. A lot of this has to do with awareness. A lot of this has to do with chassidut. A lot of this has to do with Torah thinking. All of this is in the book if it interests you. The last chapter is actually entitled "In God's Defense," and it talks about, I try to break down as much of this as I can, and turn it around. Nothing comes from heaven. Nothing happens on earth before it's first decreed in heaven. Absolutely nothing. There's one force in the universe. There's one power in the universe. The Hakadosh Baruch Hu, the God Almighty, the Holy One, blessed be He. That there's nothing else that is like Him but Him. Everything is deliberate. Everything has a purpose. The genetic transference of trauma gives people an enhanced skill set to be able to respond optimally to diversity. I think that this is our legacy. I think that this is what we need to practice. I think this is what we need to teach. And I think we need to start healing ourselves and then healing the world. And I wanted to bring my message out to everybody out there. I was originally going to name this book Holocaust Mentality. My publisher hated it. Why Holocaust Mentality? I thought for the longest time I was the only person in the world who thought these things, who had these issues. One day, I was vacationing. We grew up very, very, very tight with my family for obvious reasons. One day, we were vacationing with my cousins. My cousin Renee was scanning the room in a restaurant. Renee, what are you scanning? What are you looking at? She goes, I'm trying to look for an escape exit. What are you looking for an escape exit for? We just sat down. Oh, every time I go somewhere new, I look for an escape exit. That's my Holocaust mentality. That's what she said to me. I said, Holocaust mentality, that's fantastic. I've got one too. I'm afraid to be separated. Everybody's got one. Everyone who's suffered from PTSD has one. Everybody has any survivor in their family from the Holocaust or any genocide has has this. We all have this ability. And I think that with that, I'll open the floor to questions. And
Thank you, Jack, for sharing your story and your book with us. Very compelling. We were able to keep on so many people throughout this whole thing. Normally people drop off, but we kept them entertained and intrigued.
I'm so glad.
So now we're going to open it up to questions. If you have a question, just drop it in the Q&A box and we'll do our best to get to it. I'm going to start off. I have a question. If Poland didn't have the ceremony in 2007 honoring the righteous amongst nations, would you have made your way to Poland at some time to,
Yes.
find the answers that you found and to basically transform your life?
Yes, but I don't think it would not have happened the same way. I think that a lot of answers would have been left unanswered. I think that I owe my uncle Akiva a tremendous debt of gratitude for this trip, for putting it together, for doing everything that we did. And I got to tell you that none of this really came to a head. In other words, I wasn't able to put 2 and 2 together until years afterwards, when I would look back and say, hey, intergenerational trauma. Let me take a look. Let me see how. And it just kind of all grew from there. I wanted to quickly mention also earlier a term in Hebrew called hashgacha pratit. Hashgacha pratit means, loose translation means divine intervention, but a more accurate term would be supervision of minute details, meaning nothing happens in your life unless it's decreed from above, and everything that comes from above happens for the good, regardless of how many filters it comes and how we see it. We can interpret it as bad, but it could be as good. You could be, you could God forbid, be involved in some sort of accident with something and end up going to the hospital and say, oh, why is all this happening? And then something could be discovered in the hospital that would have otherwise went unchecked or undiagnosed. And you say, hey, I was put into that situation so that they can find this. And this is what ended up saving my life. So I encourage everybody to start developing a relationship with a creator, with a master of the universe. We have to do that. You have to make him your God. You have to make him you have to involve him in everything. Start talking to him, start involving him. You'll start to see things changing in your life. Oh, what a coincidence. No such thing as coincidence. It comes from above.
So there's a few questions about how do you find out about this meditation. I know you sent me a link. Maybe tomorrow we're going to send an email out, or if you have any information off the top of your head, you can tell people now.
Absolutely. What I found to be, there's a lot of meditations. There are several meditations. Some are visual meditations. Some are not. If you go to Rabbi Alon Anava, Alonanava. I am not a Torah authority. I am not a religious Jew. I don't believe in religion. I think that religion is separated mankind from each other and has caused more problems and more blood to be spilled than anything else. I believe that the Torah teaches that there's a creator, there's a creation, and there's a relationship between the two. The way we relate to the creator, the way the creator relates to us, the thoughts that come into our minds, we have the ability to control it. We have the ability to change it. Rabbi Anava on his website, I'll send you his website and his links. He's got several different meditations that you can actually pull up. You can pull up Hasidic meditations. So many different types of ways to, depending on what you're looking to achieve. Well, I'll send you the source.
And then someone wrote, can someone in Polish authority be contacted to see that the Jewish cemetery that is overgrown be taken care of?
They don't care. Let me tell you something. My uncle received last month a letter from the people in Poland, in Klimentov, who actually live in my grandparents' house, that knew my grandparents, that knew their families. When my uncle went there with my mother originally, when I went there with my uncle, they were afraid that we were looking to take back property that was taken from us. That was not our intention. We had no intention of looking to reclaim property. But that's what they thought, and they're definitely afraid of that. So recently, like I said, my uncle had received a letter, and the letter basically was from the woman who lives in the house. And you can, it's all in my book. And she basically said she's looking to raise money to try to save the shul. The shul's dilapidated, it's falling apart, it's not being taken care of, it's not being handled. And my uncle, myself, another family member, a descendant from Klimentov, Poland, got on Zoom, discussed what we should do about this, and we all, basically came to the agreement. The Poles, they don't care, they don't give a damn. They're not going to. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you what they did do. After we left, they ended up paving over the cemetery and expanding on their athletic complex. They know it's a cemetery. They know it. They had a whole ceremony. They had a priest there to bless it. It was a whole big thing. So, we decided to just write a letter and say, hey, I appreciate where it's coming from. Yeah, it's a beautiful building, but that's not the heart. If you really cared, you would have shown respect to the cemetery. If you really gave a damn, you wouldn't have paved an athletic complex over the cemetery. They don't care. They don't care. There's a lot of Polish guilt out there. There are a lot of laws out there that if you even insinuate that the Polish government had anything to do with the genocide, they'll throw you in jail. That's actually a law. They'll throw you in jail. They still practice anti-Semitism, rampant anti-Semitism. It's really, you go there and you will experience it like you've never experienced it before. I've experienced anti-Semitism in the United States. I've experienced it in Israel. I've experienced it pretty much like everybody else has. But when I was in Poland, it ran deep. They will sit, they'll smile, you'll see a forked tongue come out of their mouth. They don't like Jews, regardless of what they say. The governments especially, they're not going to spend any money to do anything with regards to that. That's why I said, if we were to go to Poland right now I'll bet you that stencil is still there. I'll bet you. I'll put money on it. They're not going to do anything. The government's not going to do anything. No, not happening.
And we're just gonna, I'm sorry. And we're
No,
just,
go ahead. Good.
Some Jay Lipschitz wrote, did your parents have separation anxiety?
No, my parents did not have my parents, to my knowledge, did not have any separation anxiety. There were other issues. There were a lot of other issues, like there are with any type of trauma. But I wasn't privy to actually any of their issues. They never discussed it with me, just like my grandparents never discussed it with me. For the same reason, my grandparents did not teach my mother or her siblings Polish, because when my grandparents wanted to talk about the war, or wanted to talk about something that they did not want their children to know, they spoke Polish. That exact reason is why I don't know Yiddish. My parents spoke Yiddish, spoke Hebrew. Hebrew I understand fluently. Yiddish, because when they wanted to speak about us or something, it was Yiddish. It was done in Yiddish.
And then I guess our last question, what do you say to the naysayers, the people who poo-poo epigenetics and who think it's all a bunch of nonsense?
Don't be so quick to poo-poo it. Don't be so quick to disregard it. It's an emerging field. Like any emerging field, there's a lot that needs to be learned. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of studies being done right now on the field of epigenetics, scientific studies, which are reproducible, which have been substantiated. Dr. Rachel Yehuda over at Mount Sinai, I believe, I list her in her in my book, and I list a lot of scientific literature in terms of epigenetics and what they're finding. You know, I've encountered people that poo-poo it, disregard it. I say, okay, well, you know, my experience has been completely different. And if you read the research and listen to the science, it starts to make sense. And it actually, you know, I used to think as a kid, you know, how do things differentiate? You know, you look at the bottom of the ocean. There are things living at the bottom of the ocean where we can't even live because of the hostile environment. But how does that happen? Well, you know, through genes, through genetics. A lot of your environment and the way you respond to stress is programmed. It's in the genes, so that your offspring will have a better or an advantage over you. So the memory remains. The memory is there.
Well, thank you, Jack. Thanks for speaking tonight, for sharing your book, your family
Thank you.
story. And thanks to all our viewers out there, wherever you are in the world. Thanks for joining us. We're glad you took the time out of your evening to hear about Dr. Freed's book.
It's my pleasure. You know what? If you sign up for my blog on my website,
I'm getting to it right now.
I'm gonna. The blog should be up in a few weeks, but I'm gonna have, you know, different meditations, different types of articles, different things with regard to that. If that interests you, I would encourage you to just sign up for it.
So again, this is Dr. Freed's book. You could get it definitely on Amazon. That's where I got it. But call your local bookstore. Keep your local bookstores in business. drjackfreed.com is the website. At the bottom, you could sign up for his blog. Let's see. If you haven't made a gift to support 3GNY, again, I beg of you, I thank you. Please do it. It helps us greatly to spread the word, to keep our grandparents' stories alive, and to educate people so that this will never happen again. Again, thank you for taking the time. Everyone have a Zisen Pesach, and we'll see you.
Thank you for having me. Zisen Pesach. Be well. Good Shabbos. Take care, guys.
Bye.